With its victory in the U.S.-Mexican War, it seemed to many Americans that a manifest destiny had indeed been achieved. The first half of the century had brought unprecedented material progress, new movements for social progress, and now Providence had removed every obstacle to American dominance in the Western Hemisphere.
The idea of freedom undergoes a lot of change and development in the early national period. Territorial expansion sort of helps to develop this idea. Because of the association of American destiny with the worldwide progress of freedom, this helps to create this idea of what we call manifest destiny. That is that the Americans have basically a right to take over the continent, and that those who are in the way are sort of obstacles to freedom. They're not just people who want to hang on to their land. They're people who are standing in the way of freedom and therefore can be pushed aside.
For Native Americans, the American notion of manifest destiny was disastrous.
By 1848, the challenges facing Indian people are much different. They are being overwhelmed by a white frontier that is rapidly enclosing them. The real difficulty by 1848 is maintaining any sort of hegemony and independence, any sort of self-control, trying to defend what little homeland is left from whites. And I think it's a very difficult thing. It's the idea of remaining completely independent is pretty well gone.
For Mexicans who became Americans after the war, a new identity began to emerge.
Remember, this was the kind of zone of contact of many different frontiers: the Indian frontier, the Hispanic frontier, the American frontier. People were far distant from the centers of power at the time, and I think this first generation of Mexican Americans probably didn't really change all that much in terms of their orientation. They continued to practice their customs. They continued to speak Spanish almost exclusively. They continued to eat their food and to raise their children in the Catholic faith. And this made them fundamentally different from the English-speaking Protestant Americans who were coming in. And so I think it was only in juxtaposition, it was only in terms of new people rubbing up against indigenous people that you begin to see the sharpening of lines of identity and a different crystallization of people's sense of identity over time. But this took some time to develop after the war in 1848.
With the market revolution and the expansion of voting rights in the first half of the 19th century, freedom came to mean more than mere absence of bondage. It meant free labor, universal suffrage, and democracy. When white males achieved this kind of freedom, other groups began to demand it for themselves. Abolitionists and women's rights activists gave new meaning to the ideal of American freedom.
For African Americans, they were committed in philosophical ways to freedom, certainly. But you know, it's something different when you've got a mother, a father, a sister, a brother, some close friend or relative who is actually a slave. From the standpoint of African Americans, abolition was more than just a philosophical commitment. And they took their emotional and heartfelt concerns about this institution and the need to abolish this institution into the integrated abolition movement.
They insisted that freedom must be colorblind. They went back to the rhetoric of the revolution of freedom being a universal entitlement, a birthright. And it's really their concept of freedom that we adhere to today, that anybody born in the United States is a citizen of the United States, entitled to the same rights as anyone else. Similarly, the women's movement challenged this very powerful ideology which distinguished between the public world of men and the private sphere for women.
1848 is the year of one of the great documents of American history, the Declaration of Sentiments that Elizabeth Cady Stanton drafts for a grand meeting at Seneca Falls. And that document still resonates richly in our lives. We still have something to learn from it. It's quite amazing that it is articulated in 1848 and that so many people at the time think it's the common sense of the matter, which suggests that it didn't come out of the clear blue sky, that it didn't come from nowhere, that it came out of a generation of experience.
The women's movement insisted, no, women have a right to public freedom, political freedom, economic freedom, the same opportunities for freedom as men. So they also, in the long run, will redraw the boundaries of what freedom is and who's entitled to it.